I won $67 million in the lottery and didn't tell anyone. My daughter said, "Mom, you're broke. What do we need you for?" Her husband nodded. I quietly left. The next morning, they saw my new mansion across the street. Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Marjorie Hayes, and for most of my life, I believed that family was the one thing you could always count on. I was 68 years old, a widow of 4 years, living alone in the same pale yellow house on Clover Street where I had raised my daughter Linda. The house wasn't much. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon in the mornings, a garden where I grew tomatoes every summer without fail. My husband Gerald had died of a stroke on a Tuesday, quietly the way he had lived most of his life. After he was gone, the house felt too large and too silent, but I stayed. This was where my memories lived. I had worked for 31 years as a school librarian in Mill Haven, Ohio. I retired with a modest pension, a small savings account, and the kind of tired dignity that comes from a life spent doing quiet, useful work. I drove a 2009 Honda Civic. I clipped coupons. I baked pies for the church fundraiser every October. Nobody would have looked at me twice on the street. Linda was my only child. She was 43, sharp-featured, with Gerald's eyes and none of his gentleness. She'd married Craig Whitmore 11 years ago, a man who sold commercial real estate and believed, above all else, in the appearance of success. They lived in a large house in the suburb of Glenbrook, drove matching SUVs, and sent their son Tyler to private school. From the outside, they looked prosperous. I knew, because Linda occasionally let things slip, that they were considerably less prosperous than they appeared. There was credit card debt. There had been a refinancing. Craig's business had slowed since 2022. For the first 2 years after Gerald died, Linda called every Sunday. Then the calls became every other Sunday. Then they became occasional and brief, filled with sighs and the sound of her distraction. A TV in the background, Craig's voice somewhere nearby asking something I couldn't quite hear. I told myself she was busy. I told myself this was normal. I was very good in those years at telling myself things. The tipping point came gradually, the way most painful things do. It started with small moments. A birthday dinner at their house where Linda forgot to order the cake she had promised. A Thanksgiving where Craig made a comment about carrying dead weight in a conversation about his business that felt aimed somewhere beyond his employees. A Sunday phone call where Linda said, without particular cruelty, which almost made it worse, "Mom, you really should think about downsizing. That house is just too much for one person." I had not asked her opinion. I had not complained about the house. Then came the requests. Not for my company, for my practicality. Could I watch Tyler for the long weekend? Could I bring a covered dish to the neighborhood party they were hosting? Something nice, Mom, not the tuna thing. Could I help them move some furniture? I said yes to all of it because I wanted to be useful, and because usefulness, I had learned, was the currency that bought me time with my daughter. But the exchange rate kept shifting against me. 3 months before the dinner that changed everything, I won $67 million in the Ohio Lottery Classic. I had been buying 2 tickets every Friday for 11 years. Always the same numbers. Gerald's birthday, Tyler's birthday, the year we bought the house. I checked my numbers on a Saturday morning at my kitchen table, wearing my old flannel robe, with a cup of decaf going cold beside me. I checked them twice. Then I sat very still for approximately 4 minutes. Then I called the Lottery Commission's confidential winners line. I did not call Linda. This was not a decision I had thought through carefully. It was instinct. A quiet, private voice that said, "Wait." I didn't know yet what I was waiting for. I only knew that something inside me wanted to see what the world looked like before it knew. I consulted an attorney, a financial planner, and set up a blind trust within the following 2 weeks, just as the Lottery Commission advised. My name was kept out of the public record. The lump sum after taxes settled at just over $41 million. The trust was administered quietly. I went on clipping coupons, which brings me to the dinner. It was a Sunday in late October. Linda had invited me for what she called a family lunch, though it was served at 6 in the evening. The kitchen table was set for 3, she and Craig and me. Tyler was at a friend's house. I had brought a bottle of wine and a store-bought apple pie because I had learned my lesson about the tuna. Craig had been talking for 20 minutes about a property deal that had fallen through. His jaw was tight. Linda kept refilling his glass. Then Linda turned to me. She didn't raise her voice. That was the thing I kept returning to afterward. She didn't raise her voice at all. "Mom," she said, "Craig and I have been talking. You know we love you, but honestly, we have our own expenses, our own stress. Tyler's tuition just went up, and you—" She paused, and what came next landed so cleanly it barely felt like a blow. "You're not really in a position to help anyone, are you? You're on a fixed income. You're kind of just there, Mom. I don't know how to say this nicely. You're broke, and we're barely keeping our heads above water ourselves." Craig nodded, slowly, deliberately, the way a man does when he wants to be seen agreeing. I looked at my daughter. I looked at my son-in-law. I looked at the half-empty bottle of wine and the store-bought pie I had brought, and the table that had been set for 3. I folded my napkin. I placed it beside my plate. "All right," I said, and I left. Was I hurt? Of course I was hurt. But something else happened in that car ride home. Something quieter and more dangerous. I stopped trying to explain myself to people who had already made up their minds. And by the time I pulled into the driveway on Clover Street, I was no longer the woman who had walked into that dinner. I sat in my kitchen for a long time that night, not crying. Not at first, just sitting, the way you sit when something has shifted so fundamentally that you need a moment before you can figure out which direction is still forward. The house on Clover Street was quiet around me. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. The apple pie sat on the counter in its plastic clamshell untouched, because I had brought it to their house and then, apparently, brought it back. I thought about Gerald. He had been a gentleman, a 4th-grade teacher who coached Little League on weekends and never once, in 39 years of marriage, made me feel like a burden. He used to say that a person's worth wasn't in what they could give you, but in what they revealed about themselves when they had nothing to give. I hadn't fully understood that when he was alive. I understood it now. The question I kept returning to was this: how long had it been like this? Not just the cruelty of that dinner. That was new in its directness, but the shape of it was not new. The shape of it had been forming for years, in every canceled Sunday call, every eye roll I had caught over Craig's shoulder, every way that Linda had learned to look through me rather than at me. I had mistaken tolerance for love. I had been so grateful for the crumbs that I had forgotten I had once deserved a seat at the table. I am not a self-pitying woman. I want to be clear about that. I am a woman who was a librarian for 31 years, which means I am a woman who knows how to read a situation and understand what it requires. That night, what it required was honest accounting. So I made a list. In my head, the way I always made lists. Not on paper, because paper can be found. What had I lost? Not money. I had, sitting in a blind trust in Columbus, more money than my daughter could imagine. What I had lost was the version of myself that had believed love was unconditional, that blood was sufficient, that patience would be rewarded. That version of Marjorie Hayes was gone. She had left with my folded napkin. What did I have? I had $41 million, a trusted attorney named Patrick Ossie, who had handled my trust with quiet efficiency, a financial advisor named Sandra Cho, who had already outlined 3 conservative investment strategies, and I realized as I sat in that kitchen, something I hadn't had in 4 years. I had a reason to get up in the morning that was entirely my own. The fear came next. Let me not pretend it didn't. I was 68 years old and I had just walked out of my only daughter's house after being told I was just there. The fear was not about money. It was about isolation. It was the particular terror of the elderly, that you will become invisible, that you will make a stand and find that no one is watching. What if I moved forward with my resources and found myself more alone than ever? What if the wealth changed nothing except the size of the rooms I sat alone in? I let myself feel that fear for exactly 1 night. In the morning, I called Patrick Ossie. "I'm ready to access funds," I said. Patrick was a careful man. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. "For what purpose, Mrs. Hayes?" "I want to buy a house," I said. "Specific property. I'll send you the listing today. Here is where I need to explain something about Glenbrook, Ohio, and the particular geography of Linda and Craig's neighborhood. Elmwood Drive was a wide tree-lined street of large homes, mostly built in the late 90s, the kind of neighborhood where the lawns were professionally maintained and the Christmas lights went up the weekend after Thanksgiving without exception. Linda and Craig's house was number 14. It was a 4-bedroom colonial with white shutters and a detached garage and a view from the front windows of the house directly across the street. The house directly across the street, number 17 Elmwood Drive, had been on the market for 6 weeks. I had noticed it the last time I drove to visit them. A for sale sign on a neat half-acre lot, large windows, recently renovated according to the online listing. 5 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, a wraparound porch, and most importantly, an unobstructed view of my daughter's front door. The listing price was $847,000. I had looked at it the way you look at things you believe you cannot have. And then, on that October morning, I looked at it the way you look at things you are about to purchase with cash. I sent Patrick the listing at 8:14 a.m. He called back at 9:30. "This is a clean title. Motivated seller. You can have an accepted offer by end of week if you want to move quickly." "I want to move quickly," I said. But buying the house was only the first part. What I needed, and this was the part I thought about most carefully, walking through my tomato garden that morning with my coffee, was to do this right. Not impulsively, not out of spite alone, though spite was in there, and I will not pretend otherwise. What I wanted was something more durable than revenge. I wanted witness. I wanted Linda and Craig to understand from across the street that I had been there all along, that the woman they had written off as a fixed income, nobody had been watching the same neighborhood they lived in, with $41 million in a trust and the patience of a former librarian. The plan was beginning to take shape. I went inside, poured myself a second cup of coffee, and started writing a real list. On paper this time. Because some things need to be written down to become real. The offer was accepted on a Thursday. Patrick handled everything through the trust. Marjorie Hayes did not appear on a single document. The purchasing entity was a Delaware LLC. He had helped me establish years earlier on the Lottery Commission's advice, a standard vehicle for privacy protection that had no name interesting enough to attract attention. The seller, a retired engineer named Bud Calloway who was relocating to be near his grandchildren in Arizona, accepted the full asking price with no contingencies and a 30-day close. He was grateful. He didn't ask questions. Neither did his realtor. I signed the paperwork at Patrick's office in Columbus on a gray Friday morning in a conference room with a view of a parking garage. It was the least dramatic setting imaginable for a decision that would rearrange the rest of my life. I used a pen Patrick offered me. I signed 11 documents. I shook hands with a notary whose name I never caught. Driving back to Millhaven, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly. It was too cold and deliberate for happiness. It was more like the feeling you get when you finally named something that has been wrong for a long time. Relief, maybe. Purpose, certainly. The next 4 weeks were a careful exercise in restraint. I hired a renovation contractor through Sandra Cho's recommendation, a firm based in Columbus that had worked on several properties she managed. Their trucks began appearing on Elmwood Drive on the second week of November. I had given them a specific brief. The work was to be done to the highest standard, but nothing about the exterior was to change dramatically before closing. New roof, upgraded electrical, refinished hardwood floors throughout, a full kitchen renovation with the marble countertops I had always wanted and never bought. The master bedroom was to have French doors opening onto a private deck overlooking the back garden. The front porch was to be restored and repainted, white with dark green trim. All of this was going on approximately 200 yards from my daughter's living room window. She noticed. Linda called me on a Wednesday evening, 17 days after the offer was accepted. This was notable in itself. Linda did not call on Wednesdays. "Mom," she said with a studied casualness that didn't quite land, "do you know anything about the Calloway house across from us?" "The one that sold?" I said. "You knew it sold?" "I drive through Glenbrook occasionally," I said, which was true. There was a pause. "Who bought it?" "The realtor won't say, and the LLC name is something generic. Craig is trying to find out." I noted quietly that Craig was trying to find out. I noted the anxiety underneath her casual tone. "I have no idea," I said. "Is it a problem?" "No, it's just, there are contractors there every day. Looks like a full renovation. Someone spent real money." "Well," I said, "the neighborhood has gotten popular. Good investment." She accepted this. She also, before hanging up, mentioned that Tyler had a school play in December, and would I be coming? I said I would think about it. I heard the mild surprise in her silence. The old Marjorie would have said yes immediately. I let the silence sit. But it was what happened 3 days later that I think of as the true point of no return. Not the contract, not the renovation. This. I had a friend named Dorothy Pruitt. We had worked together at the Millhaven Library for 22 years, and she was the kind of woman who knew everyone's business without trying because people simply trusted her face. Dorothy volunteered at the Glenbrook Community Center on Tuesday evenings, teaching a senior crafting class that had been running for 7 years. 2 of her regular students were neighbors of Linda's, women named Paulette and Rhonda who lived 3 houses down on Elmwood Drive. Dorothy called me on a Saturday morning, the kind of call that begins with, "Now, I don't want to worry you, but..." Paulette had mentioned at Tuesday's class that she had run into Linda at the neighborhood coffee shop. They had chatted briefly. Linda had made a comment that Paulette had found odd. Something about sorting out the family situation and not being held back by sentimental obligations. Paulette hadn't understood the context. Dorothy understood it immediately. "Did Linda ever talk to you about your house?" Dorothy asked carefully. "The Clover Street house?" I felt something cold move through my chest. "Not directly," I said. "Marjorie," Dorothy said, and her voice was gentle and sorry. "Paulette said Linda mentioned looking into whether a conservatorship was an option for," and she used this phrase, "managing an older parent's assets when the parent isn't making sound decisions." "She seemed to think you were planning something impractical with your money. I don't know what money she means, and I didn't say anything, but I thought you should know." I sat down on the edge of my bed. A conservatorship. The legal mechanism by which a court can appoint someone to manage the financial affairs of a person deemed unable to manage them independently. My daughter had been researching whether she could take legal control of my finances, which meant she knew or suspected something about the money. How? I went through it carefully. The trust was sealed. My name wasn't on the property purchase. Patrick and Sandra were bound by confidentiality. But then I remembered. 2 months ago, a brief item had run in the Columbus Dispatch's lottery section about the previous year's major winners. Not names, but prize amounts and dates. Gerald's birthday, Tyler's birthday, the year we bought the house. The numbers I had used for 11 years. Numbers Linda knew. I could not prove she had made the connection. But I didn't need to prove it. I needed to prepare for the possibility that she had. I called Patrick that afternoon. 2 things, I said. First, I need you to review my legal exposure to any conservatorship proceeding. What would Linda need to demonstrate, and how do we make sure I'm bulletproofed against it? Done, he said. What's the second thing? I want to accelerate the renovation timeline, I said. I want to be in that house by December 15th. I moved in on December 14th, not with great ceremony, not with a moving van that would have drawn attention the night before. I had arranged everything in advance, furniture selected through an interior designer Sandra had recommended, a woman named Helen Park, who had done the whole house in 10 days with a team of 5, working from a brief I had written in careful detail over 2 weeks. The house was ready when I arrived. I drove over from Clover Street at 9 in the morning with 2 suitcases, a box of books, Gerald's photograph, and the African violet from the kitchen windowsill that had been alive for 16 years. I stood in the entryway of 17 Elmwood Drive for a long moment. The floors were warm amber hardwood. The ceilings were high. Morning light came through the front windows and fell across the staircase in a way that made the whole house glow like something from a different life. And directly across the street, through those same windows, I could see the white shutters of number 14, Linda's house, fully visible, fully knowable. I set Gerald's photograph on the mantelpiece and put the African violet in the kitchen window. Then I made coffee in a kitchen that finally had the marble countertops I had always deserved. Linda didn't come across until noon. I watched her approach from the front window, coat on over what looked like pajama pants, which meant she had seen the lights and the moving van I had hired for the morning and come out immediately without changing. Craig was behind her, tie loosened, which meant he had come from his home office. Both of them looked the way people look when something has happened outside the boundaries of their mental map of the world. I opened the door before they knocked. "Mom." Linda's voice was very controlled, very flat. "What is this?" "My house," I said. I stepped back. "Do you want to come in?" They came in. Craig turned in a slow circle in the entryway, taking in the crown molding, the staircase, the double-height foyer. I watched him doing the math. It wasn't subtle. "How?" Linda said. Not a question with a rising inflection, more like a word that had been pressed very flat by the weight of what came after it. "The lottery," I said. 11 years of the same numbers. The silence that followed was extraordinary. I had imagined this moment many times in the previous weeks, had staged it in my mind with various levels of drama. The reality was quieter and somehow more satisfying than any version I had imagined, because their faces were doing all the work. Linda's mouth opened slightly. Craig's jaw tightened. "How much?" Craig said. "That's a private matter." "Mom." Linda's voice shifted. Something warmer coming in. Something practiced. "Mom, you should have told us. We would have helped you. This is a lot to manage alone at your age." "I have an attorney and a financial advisor," I said. "It's managed." "An attorney?" Craig said it the way you'd say a cockroach if you found one in your kitchen. "His name is Patrick Ossie. He's very good." There was a pause. Then Craig said something that I had half expected, but that still landed with the force of something you've been braced for. "We could contest this, you know. The lottery commission, the trust structure. If there are questions about your decision-making capacity..." I looked at him for a long moment. "Craig," I said, "I am 68 years old. I have a master's degree in library science. I have never had a DUI, a bankruptcy, a missed mortgage payment, or a single late utility bill in my adult life. I scored in the 93rd percentile on the cognitive assessment my doctor administered at my last physical. My attorney has documented all of this. If you would like to pursue a legal challenge to my competency, I would encourage you to have a thorough conversation with your own attorney first about costs, about likelihood of success, and about what the public record of such a proceeding would look like." Craig's face went red, then white. "We'll be in touch," he said. They left. I closed the door. I leaned against it for perhaps 30 seconds, my heart going faster than I would have liked. Then I straightened, walked to the kitchen, poured myself a second coffee, and stood at the marble counter looking out the back window at the garden where, come spring, I would plant tomatoes. Was I frightened? Yes. Craig's mention of a legal challenge was not empty bluster. It was a real threat, and the fact that Patrick had already neutralized it didn't make hearing it any less cold. Linda's performance of warmth, That sudden "Mom, we would have helped you," was perhaps more frightening than Craig's threat, because it was a reminder that my daughter was capable of manufacturing feeling when the stakes were sufficient. Over the following 3 days, I did very little. I unpacked my books. I arranged the living room the way I wanted it. 2 good reading chairs, a small writing desk by the window, Gerald's photograph on the mantelpiece where the light caught it in the late afternoon. I walked through every room of the house and allowed myself to feel, without irony or reservation, that this was mine. I ordered from the Thai restaurant I had always liked and eaten alone at my kitchen table on Clover Street. I watched 2 documentaries and slept for 9 hours. On the 4th morning, I woke up clear-headed and without the ache I had been carrying in my chest since October. I called Dorothy. "Have lunch with me," I said. "I want to show you the house." They tried softness next. The invitation came by text. Linda's medium of choice when she wanted to avoid the risk of real-time reaction. It arrived on a Wednesday morning, 4 days after the confrontation at my door. "Mom, Craig and I would love to have you for dinner Friday. We want to start fresh. Tyler keeps asking about you. Please come. 7 p.m. I read it twice. I thought about Tyler, who was a decent child, 11 years old, with Gerald's quiet eyes and the unfortunate habit of parroting whatever his parents said. I thought about the phrase "start fresh," which was doing a great deal of work. A fresh start from what, exactly? From Craig's threat to challenge my competency? From Linda's revelation that she had been researching conservatorship? From the dinner where she had told me I was just there? I put the phone down and went to water my African violet. The answer I sent back after 2 hours was brief. "Thank you, Linda. I have plans Friday, perhaps another time." I did not have plans Friday, but I made some. Dorothy came to the house for lunch that Thursday and spent 4 hours walking through every room with an expression that moved fluidly between delight and protective outrage on my behalf. She sat at the kitchen counter with a cup of tea and said, "Marjorie, I have to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." I told her to ask. "Are you all right?" she said. "Not the house, not the money, you. Are you all right?" I considered the question seriously. "I think I'm becoming all right," I said. "That's different from being all right." She nodded. She was a woman who knew the difference. Dorothy was not the only one. In the 2 weeks following my move to Elmwood Drive, I met Paulette and Rhonda properly. Dorothy introduced us at the community center and found them to be exactly the kind of women I had underestimated when I thought of them only as Linda's neighbors. Paulette was a retired nurse, 71, sharp and funny, who had lived on Elmwood Drive for 22 years and knew where every body was buried, metaphorically speaking. Rhonda was 65, a former high school English teacher, newly divorced, who had spent the past year discovering that she enjoyed her own company considerably more than she had expected to. They welcomed me with the straightforward warmth of women who have learned to recognize each other without much preamble. "We wondered who bought that house," Paulette said, the first time we had coffee together on my new wraparound porch. "Craig was going around the street in October trying to find out. Asked everybody. What did people tell him?" "That they didn't know," she smiled. "Nobody on this street likes Craig Whitmore very much." I filed this away. The attempted seduction continued from Linda's direction. She texted again on Saturday. "Mom, Tyler wanted me to remind you about his play. December 20th. He'd really love to see you there." This was a more sophisticated move because it used Tyler honestly. He probably had asked for me and put me in a position where declining felt like punishing a child. I didn't decline. I went to Tyler's play. I sat in the back row of the Glenbrook Middle School auditorium and watched my grandson play the role of the narrator in a production of A Christmas Carol with the seriousness of a child who has rehearsed very hard and knows exactly how important this is. He was good. He had Gerald's voice, a voice with weight in it, even at 11. Linda and Craig were in the third row. They turned around at intermission and saw me. Linda gave a small, relieved smile. Craig gave me the kind of nod men give when they are recalibrating. I smiled at Tyler when he spotted me from the stage door. He waved with both hands. I left before the reception. I had said hello to my grandson, which was why I had come. I did not need to stand in a middle school gymnasium while Craig Whitmore pretended to be delighted to see me. Driving home along Elmwood Drive, I passed both houses, theirs and mine. The lights in number 14 were on in every room, the way they always were, that slightly excessive brightness that I had come to think of as a symptom of people who were afraid of silence. My house, number 17, had the porch light on and the warm, amber glow of the living room lamp visible through the front window. I sat in the driveway for a moment and looked at it. It looked like a house that someone lived in on purpose. The second call from Patrick came that week with an update I had been waiting for. A review of all publicly available records on Craig Whitmore's business, LLCs, and real estate transactions. Nothing illegal, just due diligence that a sensible woman with significant assets should have done long before. What it revealed was this: Craig and Linda were, in financial terms, genuinely precarious. 2 LLC dissolutions in the past 3 years. A second mortgage on the Elmwood Drive property, taken out in 2023. Credit card debt that Patrick estimated conservatively at somewhere between $60,000 and $90,000. The private school tuition was running on a payment plan. They needed money. They needed it badly. And they had a mother-in-law sitting across the street with $41 million in a trust. Now I understood the conservatorship research. Now I understood everything. I called Sandra Cho and asked her to begin the next phase of my plan, one I had sketched and outlined during those 3 days of rest and was now ready to formalize. I also, on Sandra's recommendation, added 2 new items to my will, modified the trust distribution schedule, and sent a certified letter to Patrick's office outlining my current intentions in writing. Let them come, I thought. Let them try soft next time or hard. It doesn't matter. I was ready. They came on a Sunday afternoon unannounced. The unannounced visit is a specific kind of social weapon. It removes preparation time and frames itself as casual, familial, which makes any formality on the host's part seem cold and defensive. I recognized the tactic because I had seen Linda use it on neighbors she wanted to charm before asking for something. I had made a note of it at the time without fully understanding that I was already cataloging my own daughter. I let them in. Linda had brought flowers, not grocery store flowers, but from the actual florist on Main Street, which told me exactly how seriously she was taking this visit. Craig was in a weekend shirt, no tie. Tyler was not with them. We sat in the living room with tea and coffee cake, and for 20 minutes it was almost normal. Linda talked about Tyler's play. Craig praised the renovation on my house with the tone of a man trying to establish something without stating it directly. You have resources. We know you have resources. Then Linda leaned forward slightly, the kind of lean that precedes something rehearsed. Mom, we've been doing a lot of thinking. We want you to know we were wrong. The things Craig said at your door, that wasn't acceptable. She glanced at Craig, who nodded with the expression of a man doing his homework. We were scared. Fear makes people say things they don't mean. I understand fear, I said. We want to repair this. Family is everything. A pause. And we want to make sure you're protected. With this much money, there are real vulnerabilities. A family trust, one that includes us, is actually much more legally secure than a private trust managed by someone you've only known a few months. There it was, an argument designed to make including them seem like your idea, an act of prudence rather than capitulation. Patrick Ossie has managed my trust with complete integrity, I said. I have no concerns about my legal security. An outside attorney has his own interests, Craig said smoothly. Family doesn't. Family, I said, recently discussed applying for conservatorship over my finances. The room went quiet. Linda's face moved through several expressions quickly. That was a moment of panic. We didn't know what you were doing with the money. Now you know, I said. Then trust us, Linda said, her voice dropping lower, picking up the resonance of a daughter genuinely asking, or performing genuineness very convincingly. Is all of this worth destroying the family over? I looked at my daughter for a long moment. I didn't destroy anything, I said quietly. I furnished a house I own. Craig's composure broke into that tight, bitten-off tone that is angrier than shouting. The voice of a man who has run out of angles. You're making a mistake. You're alone out here. One bad fall, one health crisis. You have no one. You can't buy family. No, I agreed. You can't. He stared at me. Linda's eyes were bright with the kind of brightness I had learned preceded anger wearing the face of tears. We're going, Craig said. Thank you for the flowers, I said. The door closed with controlled force, not quite a slam, but with intention. I sat in my reading chair for a long time. Craig's words, one bad fall, one health crisis, you have no one, landed in the precise location of a real vulnerability. He wasn't wrong that I was aging. What he was wrong about was the conclusion that fear should make me negotiate. I sat with the fear until I could see it clearly. And when I could see it clearly, I understood what it was telling me. Not give in, but prepare better. I had attorneys. I had financial advice. I had Paulette and Rhonda 50 yards away and Dorothy 40 minutes by highway. What I still needed was a larger circle, people genuinely in my corner before anything went wrong. I called Dorothy. I need to think out loud, I said. Come for dinner, she said. We sat at her kitchen table until 10 o'clock. By the end of the evening, I had a list of 3 things to do in January that had nothing to do with Linda or Craig, and everything to do with building a life that didn't require their permission to stand on its own. I drove home to Elmwood Drive. Both houses were quiet in the dark. Mine had the porch light on. I went inside, locked the door, and slept soundly for the first time in 2 weeks. I chose the setting carefully. Patrick's conference room in Columbus, the same room where I had signed 11 documents on a gray Friday morning, with its view of the parking garage and its long table and its quality of institutional neutrality. I had asked Patrick to request Linda and Craig's presence under the pretext of a family financial disclosure meeting that my attorney had scheduled as a routine estate planning step. I said nothing more than that. I knew they would come because people who want something always walk through the door you open for them. They arrived 7 minutes late. Linda was dressed formally. Craig wore a jacket and carried a leather portfolio, which suggested he had his own notes and possibly his own attorney on speed dial. They looked like people who were prepared to negotiate, slightly flushed with it, carrying the energy of people who believe the meeting is going to go the way they've rehearsed. Patrick laid a series of documents on the table with the unhurried precision of a man who has done this many times. "Thank you both for coming," he said. "Mrs. Hayes asked me to arrange this meeting to clarify several matters relating to her estate, her trust, and her legal standing, and to address certain actions that have come to her attention over the past 2 months." Craig opened his portfolio. "We'd also like to discuss the structure of the current trust and whether—" "We'll get to questions at the end," Patrick said pleasantly, "if there are any." He walked them through it. Not dramatically. He was a lawyer, not a performer, but thoroughly. The trust structure, fully compliant and sealed, the cognitive assessment documentation, dated and signed by my physician, signed letters from 2 colleagues, a former supervisor, and my pastor, attesting to my clarity of mind, and then, the part I had asked him to include last, a certified record of the public search activity conducted on the Ohio Court of Common Pleas website, a search specifically for conservatorship filings, conducted from an IP address registered to the Wi-Fi network at 14 Elmwood Drive, Glenbrook, Ohio. "You searched our network?" Craig said. His voice was very tight. Mrs. Hayes retained a digital forensics consultant as part of her legal preparation, Patrick said. The search was conducted on a public court website, using a router registered in Mr. Whitmore's name. No private network was accessed. Linda's face had gone the color of old chalk. "You knew," she said. She was looking at me, not at Patrick. "You knew about the conservatorship search." "Since December," I said. "You came to Tyler's play." "I came to Tyler's play because I wanted to see Tyler," I said. "Those are 2 separate things, Linda." She flinched. Craig pivoted quickly. He had the resilience of a man whose career had required him to recover from failed negotiations in real time. "This doesn't change the underlying issue," he said, his voice finding steadiness again. "You are a 68-year-old woman managing a $41 million estate with a single attorney and no family oversight. What Linda and I are asking for is reasonable." "What you are asking for," I said, "is to be added to a trust that you attempted to seize through a conservatorship proceeding before you knew its value. I am not interested." "We didn't file anything." "You researched it. You raised the possibility as a threat when you came to my door." I looked at him steadily. "Craig, I know about the second mortgage. I know about the credit card debt. I know about the private school payment plan. Any sensible person with significant assets would conduct due diligence on the people attempting to access those assets." The portfolio in front of Craig had not been opened. "This is insane," Linda said. Her practiced warmth was gone entirely. What remained was the raw anger of someone who had assumed she was holding the information. "You sat across from me at my dinner table, and you told me I was broke and worthless," I said. "I didn't say worthless. You said I was just there. You said you didn't know why I was relevant to your life." My voice stayed level. I want you to understand something, Linda. I did not buy that house to punish you. I bought it because I had earned it. Everything that followed, the attorney, the preparation, this meeting, happened because you and Craig chose to respond to my good fortune with threat rather than with decency. Linda's eyes were wet. Craig's jaw was set. I am not asking for an apology, I continued. I am telling you that your options are now limited. You will not be added to my trust. My will reflects my wishes, which are mine to determine. If you pursue any legal challenge to my competency, you will lose, and the costs will be yours. If you would like a genuine relationship with me, built on honesty, I am not closed to that, but it will be built from honesty, or it will not be built at all. Craig stood up. We'll be in touch, he said. It meant something different now than it had on my doorstep. It meant, I have nothing left to threaten you with. Take your time, I said. Linda didn't look at me as they left. At the door, she paused, hand on the frame, as though she might turn around. She didn't. Patrick gathered his documents. Outside, a light snow had begun to fall on the parking garage. I sat at the table with my hands flat on the wood and let the quiet settle around me. I did not feel triumphant. What I felt was tired and clear in equal measure. The exhaustion of someone who has been honest in a room where honesty was not expected and has discovered that it costs something even when it's right. I put on my coat. Thank you, Patrick, I said. Good meeting, he said. I drove home to Elmwood Drive in the snow. Craig filed. I had thought he might not. Had thought the meeting in Patrick's office would have made the calculation clear enough. But Craig Whitmore was a man who believed any wall could be moved if you pushed hard enough. He retained a junior associate at a Columbus firm, and in the second week of January filed a petition for a mental hygiene review of my decision-making capacity in Franklin County Probate Court. Patrick called on a Wednesday morning with the calm of a man relaying bad news that is not, in fact, bad. He filed, Patrick said. I was expecting it. Make sure the counter-motion includes a request for legal fees. I had already planned that. The hearing lasted 4 hours. The petition was built on 2 claims: that my purchase of the Elmwood Drive property was impulsive and erratic, and that my refusal to include family in the trust was evidence of undue influence from Patrick. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with a quality of attention I found deeply reassuring, did not appear persuadable by either argument. The petition was dismissed. Legal fees granted. Craig Whitmore was ordered to pay Patrick's firm $14,200. I spent that morning replanting my African violet into a larger pot. When Patrick called, I said, "Good, thank you," and called Paulette about lunch. Linda called 3 days later, not quite an apology, but adjacent to one. I didn't know Craig was going to file. I think you didn't know the timing, I said. I think you knew the general direction. Silence then. Tyler wants to see you. Tyler can call me directly, I said. He's 11. She said, okay, in a voice smaller than she usually allowed herself. Tyler called that evening. In March, I made 2 decisions that completed what I had begun in October. I sold the Clover Street house, gone in 11 days. The buyer was a young woman named Grace with 2 small children who stood in my kitchen with the look of someone who could see herself living there. I gave her the African violet that had lived in that kitchen for 16 years. Then I funded the Gerald and Marjorie Hayes Scholarship at Millhaven Public Library, enough to sustain the summer reading program, cut for lack of funding, for at least 20 years. The library director cried briefly on the phone. I did not feel vindictive. I felt the satisfaction of a person who has always done the right size thing and has finally been given the means to do the larger one. Spring came early to Elmwood Drive that year. By April, I had planted tomatoes in 4 wide raised beds along the south wall, the kind of garden you plant when you intend to stay. My days found a shape naturally. Morning walks with Paulette 3 days a week, lunch with Dorothy every other Thursday, rondas, Thursday evening book club, 5 women, a bottle of wine, and a book. Close to an ideal amount of social life for a person of my temperament. In May, I went to Portugal. 15 days, a small apartment in Lisbon, a week in the Alentejo where the evenings were long and warm. I walked. I ate well. I took a pottery class because a woman at my guest house invited me, and I said yes, the way I was trying to say yes to things now. I sent Tyler a postcard of the Lisbon trams. He texted me a photo of it pinned to his bedroom wall. "It looks amazing, Grandma. Can we go someday?" I wrote back, "Absolutely." The loneliness was present, but it was the ordinary kind. Part of any life lived honestly, rather than the suffocating kind that comes from pretending crumbs are a full meal. Linda and Craig's life moved in the direction the facts had always been pointing. The second mortgage came due in April. Craig's credit, damaged by the probate fees and a separate contractor judgment, made refinancing impossible. Paulette mentioned seeing a man in a suit with bank insignia on his car door talking tensely with Craig in their driveway. Tyler transferred to Glenbrook Public Middle School in September. The private school's payment plan had run 3 months behind. He texted me, "New school is actually pretty okay. The library here has the whole Percy Jackson series." I wrote back, "That's a very good library." Linda and I spoke once a month. Brief, careful conversations, mostly about Tyler working towards something larger without yet being there. On a Saturday in October, exactly 1 year after the dinner where I had folded my napkin and walked out, I found a card in my mailbox. No envelope. Linda's handwriting. "I was wrong. I know that's not enough. I don't know what is, but I wanted to start somewhere." I placed it on the mantelpiece, next to Gerald's photograph, where the afternoon light would catch it. Then I went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and sat at the marble counter to think about what I wanted to say back. Here is what I learned. The people who dismiss you before they know your full story will rarely apologize after they learn it. But you don't need their apology to move forward. You need your own clarity. I spent 68 years being careful not to take up too much room. I spent the rest of my time taking exactly as much room as I deserved. One question before you go. What would you have done? Folded that napkin and walked out, or stayed? Leave your answer below, and thank you truly for listening.